newlywed couple, Eleanor and Darren, were sitting on their apartment balcony. A month had passed since they became husband and wife. The honeymoon period was over and their life together was about to truly begin. Eleanor rested her head on Darren's shoulder, smiling contentedly. Despite having spent the last of their money on utility bills, just hours before, they were young, in love, and optimistic about the future. "One day we won't have to count pennies between paychecks," Darren promised. "I know, darling, you always keep your word," Eleanor replied confidently. Both 23 years old, they had met at the college where Eleanor studied law and Darren studied economics. They shared ambitious dreams of starting their own business. Despite the inevitable obstacles, they believed in doing things out of passion rather than mere profit, trusting that life itself would aid them in their pursuit. 5 years later, after numerous setbacks, they had made it. Darren, who always kept his word, had opened a consulting company. Though modest, it was profitable. In their city, Darren and Eleanor were known as a successful and wealthy couple. As life improved, the couple considered starting a family. At nearly 35 years old, they felt it was time to have children. However, conceiving didn't happen immediately. After 2 years of unsuccessful attempts, Eleanor was on the verge of depression, waiting for the positive pregnancy test that didn't come. However, finally, the couple's efforts were rewarded. On her 38th birthday, Eleanor received the most anticipated gift. She gave birth to a daughter. Both the pregnancy and childbirth were challenging. Darren was terrified of potentially losing his wife or daughter, or both. However, their doctor was a professional who managed to prevent a severe situation when Eleanor had a significant bleed. Eleanor spent a long time recovering in the hospital, and Darren took care of their daughter unconditionally while Eleanor was there. His experience gave him a new look for women, considering all mothers as heroines. "I'm so ashamed that you have to do all this," Eleanor used to express her concern. "Don't be silly. It's our child," her husband responded with a smile and affection. Eleanor was reassured once again that she had made the right choice in choosing Darren as her life partner. It was difficult to imagine a more caring and loving man. His love for her and their daughter was evident in his look, touch, and voice. Their baby, Candice, was the most loved and happy little girl in the world. She shared her birthday with her mother, but of course the celebration was always centered around Candice. As Candice grew up, Eleanor dedicated herself entirely to her daughter's upbringing. She resigned from her job as the family business provided enough income without her involvement. She refused to hire a nanny, not because of the additional expense, but because she preferred doing everything herself. Despite growing up in an atmosphere of love and permissiveness, Candice was not spoiled. She studied diligently, especially foreign languages, and dreamed of living in a place where the sun always shines, surrounded by palm trees and the sea. She had a love for summer, heat, and bright colors. When Candice was 15 years old, unbeknownst to Eleanor, Darren organized their daughter's application to a prestigious school in Europe. After graduating from the school, Candice would easily gain admission to a foreign university, a prospect that Darren fully supported. Of course, Eleanor struggled with thought that her daughter was leaving them, but it was life. Candice didn't know that by letting her go to study in a faraway land, her mum was protecting her secret. The woman had asked Darren not to reveal anything to avoid jeopardizing Candice's dreams. However, this secrecy led to unforeseen problems that Candice was unprepared for. "We need to pick Candice up at the airport," Eleanor said as she began setting the table. "Don't worry. Her plane doesn't arrive for another 2 hours, her husband said. "Why are you setting the table so early?" "It's really early." Eleanor placed a plate on the table and sank into the sofa looking lost. Suddenly she burst into tears. Her husband Darren immediately rushed to comfort her. "Imagine, I've mixed everything up," Eleanor sobbed. She immediately sensed something was wrong with her. "I've even stopped understanding time." "Calm down, everything will be fine," Darren reassured her. "It's not noticeable at all. You've always been a bit forgetful and inattentive. I even find it endearing. But maybe we should tell Candice the truth." "No, don't even think about it," Eleanor exclaimed, looking frightened. "There's no need. We'll tell her when it's all over." Darren sighed but stopped arguing. Soon he left to meet their daughter, while Eleanor resumed her preparations. She arranged the plates and adjusted the napkins with such love and care, wanting everything to be perfect. Occasionally she stopped and closed her eyes, needing to take breaks due to the pain. But the anticipation of seeing her daughter gave her strength. This was Eleanor's only purpose in life, and for her, she was willing to endure any suffering. On the way from the airport, Darren warned Candice that her mother was a little out of sorts with excitement. The girl laughed. Her mother had always been sentimental, and it was quite endearing. She had inherited some of that sentimentality, but she was a little more resilient, not taking sorrow or joy too much to heart. "I'm so glad to see you," Candice exclaimed once they were seated at the table, her cheeks still rosy from her mother's kisses. "I have some news to share. I hope you'll be supportive and happy for me." Darren and Eleanor set their forks down to attentively listen to their daughter, but before Candice could share her news, she noticed a change in her father's expression. He wasn't listening anymore. Suddenly, he collapsed onto the floor. Eleanor and Candice rushed to him, but their words didn't reach him. Candice slapped his cheek a few times, but Darren didn't react. He passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, possibly even earlier, due to a dislodged blood clot. His wife and daughter were in shock because nothing foretold trouble. They had been enjoying a lovely evening together with no signs of trouble. Darren had seemed perfectly fine, and now his passing hit both Candice and Eleanor hard. Eleanor even more. Now she would be alone. She would have to go through her grief alone. The mother and daughter spent the rest of the evening and the following day in tears. Eleanor was lying still and staring blankly into space. Candice handled the funeral arrangements, finding it painful to see her mother in such a state. Candice was supposed to return abroad in 4 days, but postponed her departure for 2 weeks. She hoped to offer some comfort to her mother during this time. Leaving her in such a state was unthinkable. Following the funeral, Eleanor seemed to feel better, but only temporarily. At least she started talking. She remembered that Candice wanted to share something with her and Darren. "What news did you want to share?" she asked her daughter. "I'm getting married, Mum," Candice replied sadly. "The wedding is in 3 months. I brought an invitation for you, but now I don't know how I'll be able to celebrate with Dad gone." "Don't even think that way," Eleanor reassured her daughter. "He would be happy for you, and I am very pleased. It's good news." 3 days remained until Candice's departure. Eleanor seemed a bit more cheerful, though she still cried every day. Candice supported her mother, but as the day of their farewell neared, Eleanor's behavior became more peculiar. She repeatedly asked Candice if she wanted to stay longer, and if she intended to return to her homeland permanently. Candice was puzzled by these questions. She had already told her mother about her fiancé waiting abroad, so why these constant inquiries? So finally, 2 days before Candice's departure, Eleanor finally started a serious conversation. "Candice, I want you to listen to me first, and then respond," Eleanor said nonchalantly. "We still have our family business. I've been managing everything for almost 2 weeks now, but it's difficult. This job isn't for me because I don't know anything about finance. You have a better education. You know more than me, even at your young age." "Mum," Candice interrupted her, "you know I can't leave everything. My future husband is waiting for me there." "My girl, I told you to listen to me," Eleanor said affectionately but sadly. "Daddy and I hid this from you for a long time. To be honest, I didn't want you to know at all, but I can't keep silent any longer. I've been diagnosed with a malignant tumor. I'm going to go chemotherapy, and I'll start treatment in a month. I won't be able to handle the business. It's all going to collapse, and I don't want my father's business to die with him." After hearing her mother's diagnosis, Candice couldn't focus on anything else. She realized at that moment that she wouldn't be leaving in 2 days. It was harder than ever for her to keep control, but she found the strength to weather another blow of fate. "Mum, why didn't you tell me?" Tears welled up in Candice's eyes. "Are you serious? Do you have a chance?" "Don't worry. I'm still at a stage where I can avoid the worst outcomes," her mother explained. "I told you I'll be starting therapy soon, but it takes time and energy. I'll have to step away from the business." Candice pledged to stay home temporarily to assist her mother, yet she declined to manage her father's business. The prospect of responsibility and challenges frightened her. She was only 22. How could she manage a consulting company? Do you have an assistant? A right-hand person? A deputy? Candice proposed alternatives. Mom, don't even ask. I won't risk taking it on. Eleanor stated she wouldn't pressure Candice further, but asked her to consider it. They spent the remainder of the day together, with Candice reluctant to leave her mother's side, even for a moment. After Eleanor went to bed, Candice decided to call her fiancé and inform him she would be staying here a little longer. She had been waiting for a long time for a reply on her video call, and it seemed odd to her, as she knew Matthias wasn't busy at this time and should be home, and they always called each other around this time. Finally, the waiting icon changed, but instead of her fiancé, Candice saw a girl who looked as though she had just woken up, wrapped in a blanket with disheveled hair and barely open eyes. "Who are you?" Candice asked. "Can I speak to Matthias?" "Matthias is in the shower. If you're here for business, call back later," the strange woman replied. "What business?" "Look at the nightstand next to you. There's a picture of me." Candice responded, her tone becoming harsh. She was starting to understand what was happening. "I see that there's nothing here," the confused girl replied. To prove her point, she pointed the camera at the nightstand. There were indeed no picture frames there, but there was a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Matthias had claimed he didn't drink alcohol. Clearly, he had lied. As the stranger adjusted the laptop, Matthias appeared in the background. His expression changed drastically when he saw Candice on the screen. "Send my belongings to the student dormitory," Candice said, her voice choked with emotion. "Goodbye, you won't see me again." Candice ended the call. In the last seconds, she noted Matthias trying to say something. She threw her phone on the bed and sat down on the floor, holding her head in her hands and crying. The pain was not so much for her fiancé's betrayal, but from the avalanche of problems that seemed to be crashing down on her. At that moment, Candice's remaining mental strength deserted her. She couldn't hold on any longer. Overwhelmed by grief, she screamed and pounded the floor in a fit of hysteria. All the pent-up emotions from the past few days were unleashed. After the outburst, Candice spent the night crying, not catching a wink of sleep, but eventually she managed to pull herself together, her resolve 3 times stronger. In the morning, her mother entered her room. "Don't worry so much," Eleanor tried to comfort her daughter. "Everything will be fine. I'll have the surgery and beat this disease." "Mom, I'll take over my dad's company," Candice declared suddenly. Throughout the night, Candice had been doing a lot of thinking. She realized she couldn't start studying now, barely keeping herself from spiraling into despair. Her father's death, her mother's illness, and her fiancé's betrayal before their wedding had all shaken her to the core. But Candice had inherited her father's tenacity. She wasn't about to give up. Somehow she convinced herself overnight that she could manage everything. The business, her mother's care, and moving past the betrayal of the man she was supposed to marry. Candice was determined to continue her studies. She didn't want to leave the university where she had worked so hard for so long. She hoped to arrange distance education or take an academic leave of absence. "I'm so glad. I don't know what made you change your mind, but I'm overjoyed," Eleanor exclaimed. "Nothing good, Mum, but I'll get over it," Candice responded with a tearful smile. "I'll be away for a few days to sort out things at the university and pack some belongings. On my return, I'll dive straight into your business." For the first time, Candice found herself not wanting to leave home or fly to the country that had become her second home. Her associations with this place now centered around her fiancé's betrayal. Before boarding the plane, she felt a wave of panic. An unfamiliar sense of anxiety washed over her, despite having flown many times before. The foreboding feeling was so strong that she even considered canceling her tickets and rescheduling her flight. Candice managed to regain her composure, attributing her troubles to a series of unfortunate events that occurred simultaneously. However, her anxiety returned to the airplane cabin. She thought to herself, "What if these terrible events continue? What if something else goes wrong?" Despite her worries, Candice fell asleep. She was jolted awake by the panic that erupted on the airplane. People clung to their seats, their eyes wide with fear and terror. Some were praying, others were shouting for help, and some just looked around bewildered. The plane was shaking violently and the oxygen masks had been dropped. "What's going on?" Candice asked her seatmate. "I don't know," she replied, seeming more calm than the others. "It's just turbulence." "I've flown before, and I know what turbulence is," Candice retorted, concluded that her seatmate was just trying to keep her calm. The shaking didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to worsen. Over the speakerphone, the pilot assured everyone there was nothing to worry about. They would land in 20 minutes and everyone could disembark. A minor issue had arisen, but it was under control. Candice's fears immediately resurfaced. She chastised herself for not returning the tickets. She had already begun to accept her fate, not in the hysterical manner of other passengers, but quietly. She felt more frightened than anyone else, believing she had brought this misfortune upon them all. Taking out her phone, she began to type a farewell message to her mother, expressing her love and urging her to continue finding joy in life. "The message won't go through," interjected her neighbor who had remained calm throughout. Candice glanced at her questioningly. "If we crash, your phone won't survive. Your mum will never see the message, but don't worry, that won't happen. You'll be hugging your mum soon, telling her you love her in person." "It helps me stay calm," replied Candice, resuming her typing. "Let me say goodbye to her in my mind at least. She's done so much for me, and I love her so much. You'll have time to say it yourself. My name is Petra, by the way." Candice introduced herself, and they shook hands. Petra might have been a fortune teller, as all passengers safely reached their homes that day. The pilot landed the plane without anyone getting hurt, despite an engine breaking down mid-flight. If not for the pilot's professionalism, the situation could have been much worse. Passengers were quickly evacuated. "How did you know everything would be all right?" Candice asked Petra, while they waited for their luggage. "I didn't know. I just believed in the best," Petra replied. "I always think positively, regardless of my troubles. I take it in my stride." "I should learn positivity from you," Candice said, smiling. "Life has been challenging me lately." They parted ways, but Candice regretted not getting Petra's phone number. However, she felt they'd meet again. Candice found her belongings in her dorm room, to her surprise. It turns out that Matthias was not even going to make any attempts to get forgiveness from the girl he loved. Although Candice wouldn't have forgiven him, she felt a bit sad that he gave up on their relationship so easily. Having settled matters with the university and switched to distance learning, and within 2 days, Candice found herself at the airport again, awaiting her flight. "What an unexpected meeting," a familiar female voice exclaimed. "Are you planning to unsettle all the plane passengers again? Upset that your plan failed last time?" Candice instantly recognized the voice behind her and turned around, smiling, eagerly anticipating this encounter. It was Petra, who was equally elated to see Candice. During their last meeting, Candice had shared her recent misfortunes and expressed her irrational fear that her worries were causing the plane to shake, hence Petra's playful jest. As fate would have it, they were once again headed to the same destination on the same plane. This time, Candice planned to avoid losing touch with Petra. She felt as though this meeting was destined. Moreover, knowing that Petra would be beside her alleviated her flying anxieties. It seemed to her that the new friend was a good sign, that she brought good luck thanks to her optimism. Despite Petra being 5 years older, they became best friends. Besides, there were several moments that united their destinies, such as losing their fathers and their loved ones. Only she was not cheated on. Petra's fiancé turned out to be a criminal. A week before the wedding, he was arrested and soon imprisoned. "How do you still have a positive outlook on life?" Candice asked. "Teach me how." "That can't be taught," Petra replied. "I guess I inherited that trait from my dad. He was always optimistic. As for the canceled wedding, I'm not worried. I'm glad I discovered my boyfriend's true nature before he became my husband. That argument can also apply to you." At the airport, Eleanor hugged and kissed her daughter for as long as if Candice were going away for 2 months, not a couple of days. And during driving home, Candice explained to her why she canceled her wedding. That's for the best, Eleanor supported her daughter. You'll find a good guy here. I never trusted foreigners. But finding a groom was not Candice's priority. She had a challenging task ahead, to join her father's business and increase it. Candice had big ambitions. She didn't plan to sit idle. She wanted to accomplish a lot. Partly she wanted to prove to herself that she could do it. She was also concerned about her mum. The high cost of treatment was understandable. They had money, but not a lot of it. Meanwhile, Eleanor had forgotten to warn her that Darren had a business partner, and she had also left out the fact that he had a big stake in their company. Mr. Garby wasn't too upset about Darren's death. He already considered himself the full owner of the entire business. All he had to do was to buy out his late partner's share cheaply, reissue the documents, and business was done. While Eleanor was in mourning, he patiently waited. However, Candice's appearance signaled to him that it was time to act. He had no need for young, inexperienced girls in his business partnership. When Candice visited the office for the first time, she felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. She realized she was stepping into a new, uncharted world. "Oh, Miss Toll, hello. Mr. Garby has arrived and is waiting for you in the office," the secretary said to her hastily. "What, Mr. Garby?" Candice asked in surprise. "He's your father's business partner. They work together, but Mr. Garby mainly deals with paperwork and rarely visits." "Well, go into the office and he'll explain everything," the secretary said calmly. Candice straightened her suit, glanced at herself in the mirror and squared her shoulders. She was not afraid of meeting her father's partner. On the contrary, it seemed to her that this was her chance to make herself known at once, her intentions. So the girl stepped confidently out of the door. Mr. Garby greeted her with a warm smile and a few compliments. "I apologize for occupying your seat," the man said politely. "Your father didn't mind me using his office occasionally." "True. My father was a kind man," Candice replied courteously. "However, let's maintain equality and sit at the negotiation table because I feel like a guest in my own office." Mr. Garby moved to another seat, while Candice decided to change the locks later, uncomfortable with the idea of anyone freely accessing her office. She didn't appreciate the intrusion. Mr. Garby quickly brought Candice up to speed, informing her that the company wasn't as profitable as she might expect. He suggested that it would be more beneficial for her and her mother to sell him their share in the business and focus on their health issues. "Excuse me, but if things are so bad here, why do you want to buy out our share?" Candice asked logically. Mr. Garby evaded the question, but after their conversation, he left extremely dissatisfied. While Candice was proud of herself because she had been able to fight back against such a serious man, she refused to sell her share in her father's company, and in general she was going to implement new development strategies. "Oh, I think you should avoid conflict with him," the secretary Mandy advised when she brought coffee to Candice. "I didn't start any conflict," Candice responded surprised. "We discussed everything calmly. He said he would consider my suggestions." "You didn't start the conflict, but he did," the secretary paused dramatically. "You should have seen the look on his face. I'm afraid you'll have to be more cautious." Candice pondered for a moment. Though she had anticipated some hurdles, she never imagined facing issues on her first day. A week had passed since Candice assumed her role. She worked diligently, arriving first at the office and leaving last. She even took work home. Candice had to prove to everyone that everything would be different now. At the start of the second week, Mr. Garby approached her again. His visit was unsurprising for her. Candice knew he wouldn't leave her alone now. "Don't you realize there are no prospects here anymore?" Mr. Garby asked. "I'm here to remind you that my offer still stands." "I'm doing fine," Candice replied. "In 3 weeks we have a crucial meeting with all department heads. I'm preparing a comprehensive report. I'm working on our future plans and mission. Everything is under control." Despite trying to hide his anger, Mr. Garby's trembling eyebrow betrayed his dissatisfaction and disappointment. He had assumed the young woman wouldn't last 3 days. Yet here she was, preparing reports and organizing paperwork within a week. He had underestimated her. "Well, good luck to you," Mr. Garby hissed. "We'll meet in 3 weeks, and I and other shareholders will see how you are prepared." If nothing is ready by that time and there are no results, you will be morally destroyed. So be careful. Candice smiled tensely and thanked him for his concern, then gestured to the door pointedly. Just as Mr. Garby stepped out came Mandy's scream. What happened? Candice asked fearfully. He knocked over a cup of coffee on me, Mandy complained. Good thing it wasn't boiling water. You really pissed him off. Then I'm doing the right thing, Candice responded smugly. Anyway, you can go home. Let's call it a short workday. Despite her confidence in herself, Candice decided to ask her mum about her father's relationship with Mr. Garby. In a few days, Eleanor was going to the hospital for a month. Your father never involved me in the business side of things, Eleanor replied, but he did mention a man called Mr. Garby and complained that he was putting undue pressure on him. Candice didn't tell her mother that this man was now bothering her. She didn't want her mum to worry before the hospital and blame herself for asking Candice to take charge. Candice had entered the game now, and she could feel the pressure, but despite the challenges, she refused to give up. In the 3 weeks leading up to the critical meeting with shareholders, Candice committed herself entirely to her work. She stayed late in the office, took work home, held impromptu meetings, and delivered motivational speeches. However, few employees matched her enthusiasm. Many were content with the status quo and not wished to bother themselves. Mandy sided with those who supported the young boss. They even became friends, given they were close in age. Mandy was only 2 years older than Candice. Mandy mentioned that Mr. Garby had been visiting the office frequently, which was unusual for him. He must be planning something against you, Mandy speculated. I can't be certain, but some people close their computers as soon as I approach. Everyone is aware that I'm on your side. It's starting to feel like I'm being kept in the dark. Don't worry, they might be planning to undermine or embarrass me somehow, Candice responded. Let them believe they have the upper hand. Then they won't expect any retaliation from me. Yes, Mandy agreed. No one takes you seriously. The secretary's remark was unnecessary. Candice was aware that senior managers and deputies interacted with her from a position of superiority, even though she was technically their boss. Many openly showed their belief that she didn't belong. Her supporters were few. However, Candice had weathered many hardships, and the opinions of some managers and dubious executives didn't faze her. She was certain that no one could break her, no one could harm her, more than life already had. On the eve of an important meeting, the young girl decided to relax and take a bath. She was exhausted from preparations, and relaxation eluded her. Besides, as if her worries weren't enough, a pipe burst the night before the important meeting. All Candice could do was turn off the water and call a plumber. The handyman arrived within an hour. He was a young man, about 25 years old, who appeared polite and respectable. He managed to fix everything in just 15 minutes. I am grateful to you. You just saved me, Candice exclaimed. That's my job, Colton replied modestly, but it seems like you're not pleased with my work. You look sad. Candice sighed. You're right, but it's not about your work. My mum's in the hospital, and I don't have anyone to talk to. Colton was surprised at his own courage, but he offered her to share her troubles with him, if no one else was available at the moment. He was in no hurry to get home. He lived alone, and spending the evening with Candice seemed to him an excellent option. He was glad to help with more than just fixing pipes. Sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, Candice expressed her concerns about the upcoming day to him. I feel like they're plotting against me and want to ruin my father's business, Candice confessed. Mr. Garby is a menace in the industry, always acting in his own interest. Despite all my efforts, I feel like I'm not reaching my goals. It seems the company's fate is being decided, and my only support comes from my secretary and a few managers who hold no real power. Colton pondered for a moment. It was obvious that he wanted to help but did not dare. The guy realized that it would look stupid if a simple plumber decided to advise something in such matters. But he knew that he could help. He had been studying economics and was on track to graduate with honors, but was expelled in his final year, just a couple of months before graduation. Let me take a look at your documents. Maybe I can help, Colton suggested, finally gathering his courage. Candice responded to his suggestion with boisterous laughter. Seeing Colton's hurt expression, she stopped laughing, feeling a pang of shame. But a man who was fixing pipes a few minutes ago was now offering to be a financial analyst. It was really hilarious. "How can you help me?" Candice asked, not scoffing, but with a serious tone. "You mean you understand all this?" And then Colton shared with her his story. He was a university student full of high hopes, with teachers predicting a bright future for him. His scientific works, brimming with brilliance and professionalism, attracted the attention of many companies. He even worked as a consultant for several financial organizations. But everything changed suddenly. Colton fell in love with a girl, the daughter of an influential man. They planned to marry, but she cheated on him. Despite her pleas for forgiveness, Colton couldn't accept the betrayal and left her. The girl's father, seeing potential in Colton, was disappointed when the wedding was called off. He questioned his daughter about the reasons, but she lied out of shame. She claimed that it was Colton who had been unfaithful, shattering her trust in men. Furious at Colton for allegedly breaking his daughter's heart, the father sided with his daughter, refusing to believe Colton's side of the story. Every attempt by Colton to clear his name only incensed the father further, as he felt Colton was tarnishing his daughter's reputation. A powerful man manipulated the situation to have Colton expelled. The teachers were truly upset, but they were powerless to intervene. The influential father of his ex-bride sought to ruin Colton's future, and no one financial organization wanted to work with him. "So now I'm doing household tasks," Colton concluded. "I gave myself a year to wait so that the vindictiveness of my failed father-in-law would end, and I could finally do my favorite job in this city. Well, time is almost up, and I'll probably just move away from here to a place without his influence and start over. Maybe I should have done it before, but I love this city, and that's why I clung to this place for so long. Most importantly, I haven't lost my passion for finance." "What a nightmare," Candice exclaimed after hearing his story. Then she left the room and returned with a folder, where she wrote an address on a piece of paper. "Come to this address tomorrow at 9 a.m. My secretary Mandy will meet you," Candice instructed. "I'm entrusting you with important documents. I hope you won't disappoint me." "You can count on me," Colton assured her. "I'll be fully prepared." After they said their goodbyes, Candice felt somewhat reassured. However, the more she pondered over the situation, the more she chastised herself for impulsively trusting a stranger with her important papers. What if Colton was deceiving her? Could he have been sent by Mr. Garby? Candice started to believe this possibility. The plumber, who was actually a financial genius, had conveniently arrived the evening before the meeting. "What a fool I am," Candice chastised herself. "Of course, he was sent by Mr. Garby. I'm doomed. I didn't even ask for Colton's phone number." She had hired the plumber through an agency, and thus had no way to contact him. Candice was distracted from her somber thoughts by a phone call from her only friend Petra. She had returned to the city and invited Candice to unwind at a cafe or club. However, Candice declined, explaining that she needed to prepare for an important meeting. "Especially since I dug myself a huge hole I didn't know how to get out of," Candice added with the upset feelings, and confessed to her friend that she had given important documents to a man pretending to be a plumber. "You know, and maybe he's not lying," Petra exclaimed. "I studied economics at this university. We were always told to protect our reputation." They cited a senior student who lost everything due to his negligence. They didn't relay the story's details but mentioned that he was a promising individual who offended an influential man, resulting in his downfall. "Do you think they were talking about Colton?" Candice asked for clarification. "Exactly. I remember. He had such a unique name," Petra replied cheerfully. Candice felt slightly reassured. She realized that she couldn't change anything and would deal with issues as they arose. Surprisingly, the woman felt calm the next morning. She woke up 3 hours before the meeting, calmly got ready, and even found time to review the main points of her report. However, her nerves kicked in as she stepped into the office. Her legs shook and her hands trembled. To her great relief, Colton was already waiting for her there. Candice greeted him and gestured for him to follow her. "Are you ready? Should I be nervous?" Candice asked. Yes, and I have much to say, Colton replied. Save it for the council. I'll introduce you as my assistant, Candice directed him. Candice paused in front of the conference room door, adjusted her suit and entered. Everyone inside was ready and waiting for her. The sight of an unfamiliar face sparked whispers amongst the men. No one trusted a stranger, especially Mr. Garby, who seemed particularly on edge. Candice noticed him scrutinizing her new assistant. Colton started his speech immediately, showing perfect composure. Candice observed him with almost delight, despite the scornful and distrusting looks he got. The men at the meeting behaved poorly, interrupting with sarcastic remarks and openly mocking Colton's words. But Candice was shocked by Colton's remarks. He alleged that none of her partners were interested in promoting or developing the company. Instead, they were actively working to sabotage the business. Who are we even listening to? An attendee suddenly interrupted. 2 weeks ago, this financial analyst was fixing my toilet. Let's remain calm and avoid pressuring a young woman, Mr. Garby suddenly intervened. Candice, who have you brought here? If your aim was to amuse us, you've succeeded. However, if you're serious, I'm afraid I must disappoint you. No one will work with you. Candice responded defiantly. Anyway, you, Mr. Garby, will not receive your share. Saying this, she rose from her seat and exited the hall with her head held high. Colton followed her. In her office, he said, I want to add that none of these people want to develop your father's company. I have the impression that they, on the contrary, want to go bankrupt. If you agree, I'd like to offer you the position of my assistant, Candice proposed. I don't mind that you lack formal education. Excited, Colton accepted. This was his dream. A cause he was passionate about, not just a job. By the way, I thought Mr. Garby recognized you, Candice mentioned. Did you also repair something at his place? We can't afford to lose our authority, so you can't continue doing your work as a handyman. Sure, Colton replied. But you're correct, Mr. Garby did recognize me. He's the one who took away everything I was striving for. Candice was stunned. What a small world, she thought. When Candice began collaborating with Colton, things improved for both of them. The company began to develop against the wishes and efforts of Mr. Garby and his associates. The man was angry. He almost threatened Candice to sell him her share. But now Candice certainly did not want to do it. After all, her and Colton's innovative solutions worked. The company's profits increased. Then one day, Candice received a call from her mother's attending physician and invited the woman to talk to him. Candice was very nervous on her journey, worried that something had happened to her mother. Indeed, Dr. Elmeto's voice sounded tense and scared. So upon entering the doctor's office, Candice immediately asked, "What's wrong with my mum?" The doctor reassured her, "Don't worry, your mum is fine. In fact, she's doing great. Our therapy is almost finished and we have an excellent prognosis. However, there's a different issue." The doctor then put on a serious face that made Candice tremble. "It seems you've upset a dangerous man," he said quietly. "A visitor came to me last evening. I think you can guess who might hold a grudge against you." "I know exactly who it is," Candice said, nodding. "There is only one person who dislikes me enough to abandon his moral principles. He hinted that he'd be grateful if your mother didn't leave the hospital alive," Dr. Elmeto confessed. "He offered a substantial amount of money, enough to make a person reconsider their ethics. Unfortunately, I don't have any evidence of this conversation to go to the police, but you should know that this conversation took place." Candice, shocked, sunk back into her chair. Why was her mother the target? What was her mother's involvement in this situation? Dr. Elmeto let her know that he had heightened security in the ward and informed the other doctors about the scenario. Nonetheless, he was worried that not everyone might hold the same moral standards as him. "I was offered such a large sum for this terrible task that someone might be tempted," Dr. Elmeto admitted. "I can't guarantee that I'll be able to identify every potential threat. I have very competent specialists who could set things up so intricately that we wouldn't even notice." "Thank you for the warning. I'll definitely figure out a way to handle this," Candice responded, still taken aback. Immediately after, she returned to Colton for advice. He seemed to be the only one who could guide her on how to confront Mr. Garby. "Don't you see why he would need to get rid of your mother?" Colton asked earnestly. It's obvious. Your mother is dying. You're distraught and distracted. An emotionally vulnerable woman is easy prey for someone like Mr. Garby. How do I defeat him? Candice asked, her voice trembling with fear. The thought of the businessman going to such extremes had never crossed her mind. We will take advantage of the fact that Mr. Garby thinks that everything in this world is bought and sold, said Colton. Candice did not understand what her assistant was up to, but after she heard his plan, she finally did. She was reassured that she had made the right choice in trusting the humble plumber. That day, later, Candice arranged another meeting with Dr. Almido, and he noted that the timing was perfect because Mr. Garby planned to visit him that evening. That's very good, Candice said, clearly pleased. Tonight we'll handle him, record everything he says on a tape recorder, or preferably a camera, then we'll take it to the police. With that evidence, he won't avoid punishment. No lawyer will be able to defend him. I have a friend who can leak this story to the media. We'll publicize it. We'll ensure this jerk gets a long sentence. Dr. Almido promised to do his best. By evening, the tape was all ready with Candice. They were ready to execute the next part of their plan to oust Mr. Garby. The following morning, Candice called him and scheduled a meeting. She informed the police about their meeting that evening. Mr. Garby strode into Candice's office as if he already owned the place, especially after she had told him she was ready to sell her share. I am very pleased that you agreed, Mr. Garby said arrogantly. Now the price will be less, as you've taken too long to decide. Despite Mr. Garby's audacity, Candice maintained her performance. I'm in trouble. My assistant betrayed me. My mother is ill, Candice said, trying to shed a tear. I've improved our department significantly. It should be valued more. Mr. Garby waved his hand, refusing to increase the price, and at this moment he truly felt his power. But Candice suddenly switched her tone. The police already waited outside the door ready to burst in and arrest Mr. Garby. Do you think I would humiliate myself in front of you? According to your plan, I should have surrendered. But your mistake is that you underestimate people. You think money and connections grant you opportunity and impunity, but they don't. My mom will live. The company will prosper and develop, and Colton will achieve great things. As for you, Mr. Garby, you will rot in jail. Mr. Garby slammed his fist on the table and attempted to lunge at Candice, but he was restrained by the police officers who entered the office. The man shouted threats, only falling silent when shown a video recorded of him paying for the crime he had plotted. Dr. Almido deliberately asked several questions to make Mr. Garby repeat his instructions, making any denial futile. Thus, with the help of Colton and her mother's doctor, Candice rid herself of Mr. Garby forever. Candice was now in charge. Her colleagues, who once mocked and opposed her, had come to recognize her strength and respect her. Their attitudes towards her had changed. 2 months passed. Eleanor returned home, and things seemed to be improving. Candice and Colton spent a lot of time together, their relationship evolving beyond mere friendship. I realize I know a lot about you, but nothing about your family, Candice mentioned during a casual lunch with Colton. He responded that he knew very little about his own family. He had grown up in an orphanage, abandoned by his mother shortly after birth. He knew nothing of his father. Candice felt sympathy for Colton. She began to understand why he was so determined to succeed, why his desire for a normal life was so strong. She also understood why he was so kind and compassionate. He had endured life's hardships too. She believed that such experiences could only make one a better person. The more Candice got to know Colton, the more her respect and affection for him grew. Colton, however, had loved her for a long time, but lacked the courage to express his feelings, leaving her to be from an entirely different circle. If not for Mandy, they might never have confessed their feelings. She had noticed their mutual gazes and was tired of seeing them waste time out of fear. The sly secretary orchestrated a situation where Colton and Candice would be stuck in an elevator together, even bribing the elevator operator to make it happen. I'm sorry, but you'll have to stay here for another 2 hours, the operator falsely claimed. Both Candice and Colton insisted they be let out, but the man maintained that he had left his tools in the storeroom and they would have to wait for assistance. It was in the elevator where their first kiss occurred. Mandy, watching the event unfold through the elevator camera, was overjoyed. "Let them out now," she cheerfully told the elevator operator. "You're doing something ridiculous," the employee responded, waving his hand dismissively, but obeyed her request. "I only helped those two. They would have been walking around each other for a couple more years," said Mandy smugly. She was accurate in noticing Candice and Colton's weakness. Even after sharing their first kiss, they felt awkward and unsure about how to interact after that. 6 months later, Colton proposed to Candice in a beautiful setting. They began with a boat ride on a scenic lake, followed by Colton serenading Candice with a love song on his guitar. The song ended with his proposal, which Candice couldn't resist. On their wedding day, Colton, in his heartfelt speech, expressed gratitude to Candice for transforming his life. However, Candice had another surprise for her husband. Knowing his desire to earn a diploma, she had managed to get him reinstated at the university. He only had to complete his final thesis to earn his degree. This is how young people, following losses and betrayals, found each other and decided to continue together, bound by love and respect.